All right, well, there is our cue to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Disability and Awareness and Intervention ECHO. We're thrilled to have you join us today. This is our kickoff of the series. We are recording today's session. We record that for educational and quality improvement. We store those on our Canvas page as well as our YouTube channel. By participating in today's session, you're essentially giving consent to be recorded. Please don't hit that leave button, but if that gives you grief, you can go ahead and disconnect from the session. If you've never joined an ECHO before, welcome to your first ECHO. We are thrilled to have you. We love to have interactions. So if you want to put comments or questions into chat, we will make sure those get answered. And again, it's a way to just kind of build that connection over this Zoom narrative, Zoom kind of, what is this? A Zoom call. Oh my gosh. And then we do talk about some sensitive topics. So please protect individual privacy by de-identifying any information. If you have any questions about how to de-identify, you can reach out to one of the Hub team members. They all have an asterisk in front of their name so that they are easier to find in chat. But again, just de-identify any examples or situations. Key components of an ECHO session are that we have a subject matter expert. Today, I will be the subject matter expert. We also will have case presentations and discussions. The case presentations today are going to look a little bit different. I've weaved them into my presentation. Sometimes we don't all love talking or sharing things, so please don't leave when those case presentation comes on. It's a great way to continue to build that networking with each other, and everybody on the call has amazing ideas and resources. That those case presentations give us an opportunity to share that knowledge and learn from each other. So we really would love to hear from you. And again, it's just that way to build that networking. If you've not taken a minute, rename your profile with your name and what your discipline is. Again, it's just that nice way to continue to know who's on the call and get to know each other. You can raise your hand, put your comments into chat, and here's a way to do that, or a reminder. If you have questions about that, you can reach out to Leo or Tori, and they will help walk you through that. There's someone that came off mute. Okay. So some quick etiquette sessions. Just remember to keep your questions brief and on topic. Introduce yourself. We'd love to see you on the screen. So if you're comfortable, we encourage you to turn on your camera. Again, just trying to build up that networking over this virtual platform. Throughout today's session, we will be dropping out in the survey link, and that's how we send out a certificate for attendance. We ask that you fill out those surveys. Those surveys just give us information of how we can improve this series or change any of the topics. And we take the information that is gathered in those surveys and really make changes to our ECHO networks. So please and thank you for filling those out. We store everything on our Canvas page. So if you would like access to our Canvas page, you can email disabilityecho@usu.edu to request access, and we will get you that. We store PowerPoints, presentations, the video recordings, the list of recommendations that we come up with from our breakout groups. So a ton of really good information is stored on that Canvas page. Case studies or case narratives, problems of practice. whatever it makes it easier to digest, we would love to have someone share a case. It's a great opportunity to hear from your colleagues and everybody on this call about recommendations or resources or new ideas. You really can take that information and apply it to the families and clients that you work with. So if you're interested in doing that, you can reach out again to disability echo@usu.edu, and we'll get you set up on the schedule for that. We do have social media as well, so take a minute to follow our social media pages. This is a great way to hear anything that's happening here in the Echo world. We post updates, information that is shared with us, as well as any of our other Echo networks here at the Institute for Disability Research, Policy, and Practice. Hey, so today, I don't think I introduced myself. So I am Janel Preston. I'm a special educator here at the Institute for Disability Research, Policy, and Practice at Utah State. We're going to spend some time thinking about how we understand disability in early childhood. But more importantly, we're also going to notice early concerns or how we notice those early concerns so families can access the support when it actually makes the biggest difference. Throughout today, you'll be noticing kind of a common theme, and that is really that early noticing leads to early support, and early support changes outcomes. So I know you guys have been putting in your contact information into chat, but before we kind of jump into this, really answer this question. Who here works directly with children? And you can just put it into the chat. Yes, no. Raise your hands. So lots of yeses, some nos. Okay, how about who here and again into chat, who is more in a system or leadership role? So again, some systems, some yeses, we've got that. How many here are just as a parent? Anybody have a parent role? Also, yes, yeah. A lot of us on this call are parents, right? Directors. And that's what I really love about this group, or that no matter what your role is, we all play a part in early identification. So let's go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to walk through a few different things. We're going to start building a shared understanding of what we mean when we say disability, because we don't all come in with that same definition. We'll talk about why developmental screening matters. And what I really want to emphasize here is that it's for all children, not just the ones that we're worried about. And then we'll unpack something that causes confusion at different times, and that's the difference between developmental monitoring, screening, and evaluations. And then we'll spend some time thinking about visible and invisible disabilities, because that's where we tend to miss a lot of kids. As we move through this, again, please use the chat feature, raise your hand. Hopefully it's going to be interactive, because we all bring that unique perspective to this process. And that's the great thing about Echo, is that we all learn from each other. It's moving that knowledge. And I want you to kind of constantly be thinking about, what does this look like in my system, and where does this break down? So when we use the word disability in early childhood, we're really talking about differences in how a child moves, learns, communicates, or interacts with the world. And those differences can show up in everyday life. Things like playing, expressing needs, or participating in routines with others. But I want to stop here for a second because this next idea is really foundational. And that is that disability is part of the human diversity. It's not a deficit. And that shift in how we think about it really matters because we turn from, instead of asking what's wrong with this child, we start asking, how can we support this child's development and participation? That might sound like a small shift, but it really completely changes the tone of our conversations with families and the community in general. It moves us from judgment to partnership, from trying to fix something to trying to understand and support. It really helps, again, change. It's just not about that language change, but it's about that experience that we all have. Again, I just was talking about that disability is part of the human diversity, and it's not something that we're going to fix, but something that we support. And when we look at that lens in early childhood, it really raises practical questions like, how do we understand what we're seeing in young children? Because in early childhood, we hear two terms pretty often, and that is developmental delay and developmental disabilities. And while they're related, they're not the same. A developmental delay means that a child is taking longer to reach milestones compared to their peers. And a developmental disability is typically a longer term difference. I'm going to take a drink, sorry. So a developmental disability is long term and it affects how a child functions over time. And this is where it can kind of get tricky. Early on, we don't always know which one we're seeing. And that's where people tend to get stuck. They start waiting for clarity, waiting for it to become more obvious, or waiting until we're sure. But we don't need to wait. We really can take action. We need to act on what we're noticing, whether or not we have a diagnosis or a label to that. The support really depends on whether or not someone is noticing and responding to the concerns. And what does that actually sound like in practice? Because most of our interactions with families don't happen in big concepts. They happen in everyday conversations, and the words we choose in those moments mattered. So if you look at the first one, that person first versus identity first. As I was going to school, I really learned more about that person first identity. So it would be a child with a disability. But as self-advocates and others started talking about it, they really started to say that their disability is part of their identity. So you might hear terms like an autistic person or I have autism. And so one of the big things to make sure when you're using language is to ask the individual or family. I often use them interchangeably during presentations. And again, just because I was really taught that person first language. But we also need to come at it from a strength-based language approach. So instead of saying he's not talking, we might want to change that into that he's communicating in a few ways right now, and we can build on that. Those shifts might feel small, but it changes how families hear us, and it keeps the focus on strengths and next steps instead of deficits. It really helps and invites families into that conversation instead of feeling like something's wrong. They're part of supporting their child and it keeps them engaged. Um, Again, think about your own setting. What are some phrases that you might unintentionally feel or that you might hear that are kind of unintentionally that deficit based? And you can just put those into chat. Anybody have any ideas that they hear? The can'ts, nonverbal, yeah, lacking. He's lacking those things. Behind. So as you're thinking about it in your own setting, how might you then think about how you might change some of those things to feel more strength-based? Somebody said he's a SPED student. And again, how can we change those so that it's avoiding that deficit framing and moving into more of a strength-based language? So throughout today's session, think about that. Okay, we're going to walk through a few statements. So continue to keep your chat open and you guys are going to identify whether you think these are true or false. So the first one is that families know what to expect and what information to talk about with providers. So false, lots of falses. Yeah, and that's true. Most families don't know what to expect. Kids don't come with a roadmap. I also don't know if something that I, as a parent, am worried about is something that my provider is worried about. So again, continue to think about how do we help support families with this information. So the next one, families want to know what is typical and what to expect with their child. True, 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 true. Look at that. And that's exactly it. It is true. Families are Googling, they're asking questions. They want to know what is typical. They also want to know how their children are meeting those expectations. So we know that these are prime opportunities to have conversations about development in general. And again, normalizing that part of the conversation of whether or not it's a developmental disability or a developmental delay. So the next one, it's sufficient to have a family complete a screener with questions about development. True or false? False, false, false. Okay. It is false. And this is a big one because lots of times families, we give them the screener, but then we miss that next piece. And that is the talking to the families about that screener. Because if families don't understand what it is or what that means, it doesn't help. Which leads us to this next question. Involving families in developmental monitoring makes tough conversations easier. True, true. Yeah, it does. When we've been talking about development or talking about their concerns, when we need to bring up hard conversations about things that we might think that the child is missing, it really helps have those conversations, those tough conversations easier. Okay, this last one. Most families complete developmental screeners during well child visits. True or false? Maybe true. True. Yeah. This one kind of surprises a lot of people, but it's actually false. Um, and when we know that they're doing it and looking at the data, um, it reports that only about a third of families report completing a developmental screener. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't. It really means that they didn't realize what that was. Um, so, you know, 2/3 are not completing those screeners. And again, this really tells us that we can't rely on one system to catch concerns. We have to have actually engage and actively engage the families during that. Jennifer just put in here that in Utah, it's closer to 44% have completed a screener. So thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that. Um, but again, it just, lots of times we think, well, those conversations are happening during their well child visits, and they aren't really. And so it is up to all of us to have those discussions and ensure that we are sharing this with families. I had to make sure I'm sharing my sound because my next slide has a video. We're going to just watch this video together because I want to take and just remind us that behind all of those numbers, there's a family that's attached to that. And as we watch this video together, think about some of the things that the families share with us that is helps them move from just wondering to actually taking action. Okay, let me know if you can hear them. Oh,
Clara is our first child, and we didn't know what to expect being first-time parents. And it's just been such a fun experience to watch her grow. Starting out very early, we monitored Clara's development using the Learn the Signs Act Early checklist. It was just an amazing resource to be able to say, okay, you know, this is what she should be doing at this age. And it calmed our fears a little bit.
I would have to say my favorite resource of the Learn the Signs Act Early would be the app. But having that readily available has honestly been great, and it's been awesome just seeing her development and growth. The Learn the Signs Act Early app is actually very easy to use. I can access it right there on my phone, and whenever my mind kind of pops to it, I can open it up.
I think I am a Learn the Signs Act Early super user. The Learn the Signs Act Early materials have been invaluable to me because I feel like they've been there with me throughout parenthood in kind of the way that a wise old friend might be.
Using Learn the Signs Act Early has helped me monitor my daughter's development and gives me a great peace of mind that the information is accurate and it's backed by science. It's fun to see when she achieves a milestone. I feel very proud for her and excited.
And it's not just a milestone of, is my child doing this next thing? It's what should I be working with my child next? Because that can be a big question mark as a first-time parent.
You know, I want to know if maybe she's lagging farther behind than she really should, and that's something to bring up with our pediatrician.
Having something at my fingertips to kind of go through it with her physician. She's hitting these milestones, but not these other milestones. Should I be concerned? What kinds of things can I do to bring her up to speed? And then taking that and translating it with her teachers in her classroom to make sure these are the things I would like to focus on, and how can we work together to make sure that she's developing appropriately.
The Learn the Signs Act Early resources empower parents to take a stake in tracking their child's developmental milestones.
okay, so what were some of the things that the families used in this video or helped the families move to actually taking action? A parent screener, the app, yeah, a checklist, A checklist, yeah. So all of those things, by having families engaged in that process, what is it? Did you guys notice what they also shared in how they brought those conversations up with their providers? There were some things like that they said, I knew what to talk to my doctor about, or I knew how to bring that up with my early childhood providers as well. And I think that's where it really helps us to involve the families in this process. If we sit for this with this for a minute, we know that 1 in 6 children has a developmental disability. So that really means that in almost every setting that we're in, whether we're in a classroom, a child care, whether we're on home visiting a pediatrician's office, we are already working with children with developmental disabilities or differences. And that's why looking at development is so important. These numbers tell us that this is common, it's often missed, and especially in areas like behavioral and social emotional development. So when we hear people saying, I don't really see this in my setting, or it's not usually there, it's really just that we're not identifying that yet. And that's where that family engaged developmental monitoring becomes really powerful. It isn't just checking milestones, it's that ongoing conversation. It helps us celebrate what the child was already doing, or as that dad mentioned, what to expect next, and how to continue to help with that. Families know their children in ways that we never will. They see patterns, they see those small changes that don't always happen in a structured setting. Whether good or bad, they really are an important part of this process. And by bringing them in, we're building that trust in order to catch things early. And the stronger the relationship, the earlier the concern is shared on both parts of that relationship. Okay, so I want to introduce you to Maya. This is a kind of a typical scenario that probably all of us have noticed at one time or another. So Maya's a 24-month-old in a child care program. Her providers are starting to notice that she's only uses a few single words. She's not pointing to show interest. She gets frustrated and has frequent tantrums. So her parents share that she's just she's a late talker. Her brother talked late too. She's not worried. They're not worried about her. She'll catch up. And her pediatrician didn't bring up anything at her last well visit. So we're now in this conversation. We're starting to see some of those things, and parents are sharing some information back. So we're going to go and move into our breakout discussions. And we'll have about 15-20 minutes to have this conversation. What are some concerns that were shared on that? What did you notice? The next question is, what would you do next? How do you talk to families? And are you noticing any system barriers that exist? Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. Let's have a little bit of a discussion of things that you guys talked about in your breakout groups. So I'm just going to randomly call on a hub member to answer what they had. So Eric, in your breakout group, what were some of the things that you guys identified as noticing?
Well, we definitely we talked about some kind of system barriers that
Okay.
some system barriers, like for example, Natalie Allen was part of our group and she is an APRN and a provider. And she said a lot of times providers may be well-intentioned and really want to discuss these things, but a well child check may only have 20 minutes scheduled. And so to be able to do a physical exam and go through all of that other stuff, and if parents bring questions, sometimes it can be tough to do additional screening in that time frame. So even though there might be a will to do it, there might not be the time frame to do the actual screening. And that, we're not saying that the doctor shouldn't have brought it up, but that could be a reason maybe why the provider didn't bring it up.
And I think that's a really great point to bring up. Those are some of those system barriers, right? And again, where it just can't rely on one system to try to catch all those families. So I love that discussion. Kurt, how about in your group?
And maybe I'll just jump in really quick. I was in Kurt's group. But to add on to what Eric provided, one of the things that our group highlighted was making handouts available by the provider. So maybe they didn't have that option to talk or to do that screener, but it's also a very overwhelming time for probably the family. There's a lot going on. So having the ability to have some of that information that they can take with them and go back to at a more calm time was one of the things that we also brought up.
That's a great point. Amber, how about your guys' group?
You're still talking on the first one, right?
Whatever your group talked about.
Oh, okay.
Whatever you want to share.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So one thing that we, there were a number of really good comments. Some things on like what would you do if you were in that situation in the schoolroom? We talked about a lot of different resources that maybe we could refer the parents to, and realizing that maybe some of the concerns that we see in the classroom are not concerns that they see at home, and also that parents might just get along better with one person or organization over another. And so in Utah there's some and nationally too, but there's some really great options. We talked about independent living centers, which are in every state nationally, and they're excellent for handing out resources. There's of course early intervention services for littles up to age 3. There's like in Utah, there's the parent center that can help educate teachers on what to look for and some strategies. So we talked about some different ideas that way that maybe we could approach the parents with a lot of different options for them.
Right. And I love your point of that maybe in the care center, they're noticing something different that the parents are noticing. And so again, it's that ongoing conversation. It's not just a one and done conversation. It needs to happen frequently. So I appreciate everybody having those discussions. And we're going to compile all of those recommendations because Amber just brought up some really good suggestions like the independent living centers or the Utah Parent Center, and not everybody knows those resources. So again, that's another great thing that happens during the case presentations. We're all able to share their ideas. So we're going to move on to some clarifying things that sometimes cause some confusion. And that is developmental monitoring, developmental screening, and developmental evaluations. And monitoring is the first step of all of this process. So it's something that we do all the time, and it's really about noticing those patterns that a child is doing and any changes that happen over time. So again, talking about changing that focus is instead of focusing on what's missing, we can really anchor those conversations in what are we seeing. So for example, instead of saying she's not using gestures, we might be able to talk with families and others in that she's communicating in different ways right now. Let's keep an eye out on how she starts to use gestures or points or even share things over time. And that's monitoring. It's really paying attention to what's emerging, what's developing, and what might need a closer look. So like Eric had brought up, Natalie shared that sometimes parents ask questions during those visits. And again, we can share resources so parents know what to continue to look for and what might need a closer look on it. It's something that really happens all the time, is this developmental monitoring. And again, engaging families in that process so we know when to act early if we need to. The next thing is a developmental screener. And so a screener is a documented, standardized next step. It moves us from thinking something is just off to that we have data to act on. It's not just an opinion. It really provides that tool to help us know when to move to the next step. And those two things are overlapping. Monitoring is ongoing. It's things like that parents are noticing, like he said a new word this week. She's starting to point to things that she wants. He gets frustrated when he can't communicate. So it's really seeing those patterns over time, something that we might not see in a visit or in our classroom. When we experience and expect families to share those things, we're not adding work to them. We're really valuing what they already know. And then moving to that screening, and the screening is a more validated tool. It's really to capture information, not just something that we hand to families, but that we do with them. We're talking through what we're seeing. So we can really help change the way that this developmental monitoring and screening process happens, because we know that when we do them both together, we get services to families and to kids in a more appropriate time. When we look at monitoring alone, we know that that's not enough. We know that screening alone isn't enough. But when we do it together, we can make sure that those points in time are happening to families. So it's not choosing one or the other. It's really including both into our work, and it creates that continuous process over time. The recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics really helps ground the work in what we're doing with evidence. It's not just a personal preference or what feels right in the moment. They're nationally recognized guidelines so that all children are administered a screening test at 9, 18, and 24 or 30 months old, and that autism specific screenings are at the 18 and 24-month checkup. Again, coming back to that whole concept of that it's a universal screener, so that we are catching all children, and that we are following those practices. And then the other thing is that anytime concerns are brought up, whether or it's from a conversation, whether it's from the screening piece, whether it's from a caregiver or from yourself or another provider, we want to make sure that we take that next step. And we want to really make sure that we are having those supportive conversations with families, sharing those resources. And because we know that when we make early action, it's not just for the child's development, but it's for families' confidence and supporting systems. So you guys are all in a really unique position to notice those early signs and help families that move to the next step. Which brings us to the last piece of that. And this is developmental evaluations. A lot of times people start to think that this is where real decisions happen. Evaluations are done by a trained specialist that take a look at a child's development. We ask questions like, is there a developmental delay? Is there a specific condition or diagnosis? And what supports does this child qualify for? It's typically done by specialists like a developmental pediatrician, a psychologist, or early intervention teams. And it really helps us move to using those developmental monitoring, the screener, which elicits that there might be a need for evaluation, and it helps us take a deeper look at understanding why and what supports are needed. So if we zoom out, monitoring is equaling noticing patterns over time. Screening is gathering more structured information, and then the evaluation is that deeper understanding and determining supports. Okay, so open your chat again. Let's see if we can all determine whether these next few things are an evaluation, monitoring, or screening. So a pediatrician refers a child to a developmental specialist for comprehensive autism evaluation. Okay, yep. So this one is the evaluation piece of it. We're hoping that the monitoring, the screening already happened, and those conversations are occurring. So a toddler's teacher notices over several weeks that he isn't combining words and shares this with families. Yeah, this one's monitoring. It's really those observations over time. It doesn't necessarily mean that we need to take next actions, but it's continuing to have those conversations with families. A provider talks regularly with a caregiver about milestones and helps them track what their child is doing over time. Monitoring, screening, or assessments. Yeah, so this one is monitoring, which hopefully is going to lead us to move to a screening piece. Again, thinking about how do we have those conversations to build trust with families, because if we're starting to notice that there is some things popping up, we might want to talk with a family about doing a screener. And again, by having those ongoing conversations, it helps that piece not seem as frightening to families or to others. So a parent completes the ages and stages questionnaire at their child's 18-month checkup. Yeah, this is actually a screener. It's really using a structured tool to decide next steps. Again, it's not necessarily, we're not doing this because this family has a concern. It's because this is part of that universal process. That an ages and stages questionnaire should be done at the 18-month checkup, and which helps us determine whether or not we need to move to the next step. So an early interventionist conducts testing, observations, and interviews to determine if a child qualifies for services. Yeah, and this one is that evaluation piece. And so hopefully you can see how utilizing both of these two together, really, or all three of them together, brings us to make sure that we are getting those appropriate services for the families and acting early if we need to. Okay, so now we have Mr. Liam. So Liam is a 26-month-old in the same program. His providers are noticing that he's not walking independently. He has difficulty using both hands together. He falls when he tries to stand. His movements appear stiff. His parents shared that they've noticed that he's behind with walking, and the doctor said to watch and give him more time. So if we look at this child in comparison to Maya, we do notice that the concerns are more visible, but it's often still delayed because of that wait and see. So we're going to go back into our breakout groups and again have these discussions. What do you notice? What do you do? How do you talk with families, and what system barriers exist? So because it might be some of those same conversations, we're going to only go into breakout groups for about 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully, again, you had some great discussions in your breakout groups. And we will gather all of those recommendations and have those on our Canvas page. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip the discussion part so that we can just finish up in the last 15 minutes. What we did see with those two children is that some concerns are easier to see and some concerns are easier to miss, but both require the same response. They both require ongoing conversations with the families, screening, follow-up, and offering support to families. We know that systems don't always respond the same way. So when we look at that, we need to make sure that we think about how might these children be missed, or how can we help support those families in getting the services that they need. We're going to watch this video that just starts our conversation around visible versus invisible disabilities.
Understanding disabilities.
I like to play basketball. How about you?
I like to draw. How about you? I love hanging out with my friends. How about you?
Mia was born with muscular dystrophy. Basically, that means some of her muscles are getting weaker rather than stronger. Ian's legs aren't strong either. That's why he uses a wheelchair. He may not be able to run up and down the soccer field, but he's really good at drawing. In fact, he's really good at a lot of things. A disability is a condition that affects a person's body or brain. Mia and Ian have disabilities that you can see, but some people have disabilities that you can't see, like me.
Amber has dyslexia. This causes letters on a page to look scrambled. It takes her longer to read and learn than her friends.
And sometimes I have to leave the classroom to get extra help from a different teacher.
But you know what? She doesn't need any extra help on the basketball court. She can even dribble between her legs.
We're all alike in some ways and different in other ways. That's what makes us special. I like being me. How about you?
So that video really helped us start to see that there are disabilities that are visible, that can be easily seen. So those can be things like motor differences. They have limb differences. They have physical impairments. But then there's also the invisible disabilities, and things like developmental disabilities like autism or ADHD or dyslexia may be invisible to us. They could be mental health conditions like anxiety and depression, chronic illnesses, so diabetes, epilepsy, or chronic pain. Both of these children need supports, but only one may look like they do. And this is where sometimes our biases come in. If we think about that, we think about who might we refer first and who might get taken seriously sooner. Many of those children that are at risk are at the least obvious. We think about disabilities in general, we picture more of the visible ones or something with more significant needs. But that does not mean that the individuals that have a disability that are invisible are any less at need for that. When we look at those things and we don't take that into consideration, things like communication or social, emotional, or sensory processing challenges can be missed if we're not intentionally looking for them. And again, some of the other things that come into play when we think about kids that are getting missed, again, not because their needs are less significant, but because there are more barriers to that identification. So it might be children from multilingual households because it's really harder to distinguish between language differences and a developmental delay. And sometimes providers and families are hesitant to raise those concerns. Children in rural or frontier communities are sometimes getting missed because they have a delay in or inability to access screening tools, specialists, or follow-up services that can be limited, which can delay identification. Also, children without consistent health care. So if they're not attending regular well child visits, they may miss key screening points altogether. Families that are experiencing stress, housing instability, or limited resources, again, are ones that are sometimes missed with this. And sometimes what looks like no concern is actually no opportunity to be identified. And that's where all of us again come into play when we stay open and curious to creating more opportunities by observing, asking open-ended questions, offering those screeners. It really is starting to make it safe for families to share what they're noticing. So let's pull this all together, and why does this actually matter in early childhood? Like I've just shared, when we only act on what we see, we're missing many children, and it misses those opportunities to be identified. We want to think about a child who isn't pointing or using gestures. Those can go by unnoticed. A child that has harder time with social back and forth interactions might be described as a child that's quiet or more independent rather than raising a red flag. And that really connects back to that Maya. There was nothing extreme. There was nothing really that stood out particular to the family, but when we slow down and observe and have those conversations, it really can start making sure that we are acting on those concerns and getting the families the experience that they need. It's moving away from that wait and see attitude to we're noticing something, let's take that next step, can really build those conversations with them. If we look at these two children, so we have a child here that was identified early. And both of them are very similar, but what we notice on a child that it was identified early is the family has access to developmental information, the provider notices signs early, a screening is offered, and referral happens. So the outcome is that the family feels supported, the child received services by age 2, and they got early intervention services. Again, if we look at a family that had this missed opportunity, it didn't really mean that this child was any less in need of those services. It again missed that opportunity. It could have been one delayed conversation, one missed screening, or one really let's wait and see. It can change that trajectory by years. So we look at this as that the family wasn't sure what to expect. They didn't have consistent monitoring. Concerns were often shared with let's wait and see instead of just offering a screener. And so those concerns then continue to grow over time. They had a late referral. They weren't referred until preschool and it missed that early support window. So families then weren't sure what to do. And how do we bring within the systems that we're all in into creating better outcomes for families? And that's the things that we can do to make those changes. We can notice that one thing, we can start having those conversations, as well as have offering those screeners. And that's what can move one child from a missed opportunity to be identified early and getting those supports. I want to take a minute to just talk about some few misconceptions that we often hear, and many of us have probably thought or said at one time. And it's things like, if I can't see it, it's not serious. They'll grow out of it. They seem fine. And they're understandable reactions, and they often come from a place of wanting to reassure families or even ourselves. But the challenge really is that these can unintentionally delay support. So when we talk about early development, not everything is visible right away. Many early developmental differences, especially those in behavioral or social interactions, can be subtle. A child might look like they're doing fine on the surface, but maybe more important skills that are still emerging, and that delay hasn't come yet. So when we really look at that, we notice that children with invisible disabilities are often misunderstood, labeled incorrectly. So something that is actually a communication challenge might be labeled as a behavioral problem. And most importantly, they really get that delay in getting the supports, not because anybody's doing something wrong, but because those needs aren't immediately visible. So think about within your system or within your job or everyday work, where are some things that you can do to shift that conversation? Instead of asking, do I see a problem? We want to start shifting that to what might I be missing? And again, that just helps shift that conversation, that we can ask a few more questions and create more opportunities to notice those early signs. Again, awareness is critical. Not only does it help us ensure those services are getting met, but it also helps increase or decreases that stigma. When we openly talk about development, we reduce that fear and judgment, and families are more likely to feel safe in asking those questions. When we create that awareness, we create access, and awareness is often that door that opens services. It also supports families. When we talk about developmental differences early or just development in general, they started to feel safe, heard, and supported. So really, by building that awareness, we're not just identifying deep needs, we're improving those experiences and creating better outcomes for families. So when you have a concern, keep it simple. Notice what you're seeing. Share it with the family. Recommend those screenings. Refer if needed. and continue to monitor that. Just because they've now entered services doesn't mean that we don't need to continue to do the screening and have those conversations. So the key takeaways I want to leave with you today are that disability is diverse. All children benefit from screening, and early identification matters. We know that the earlier we notice, the earlier the families get support, and that changes outcomes. So I just want to thank you for all the work you're doing already. I know sometimes it's hard, but thank you all for doing that. I'm also going to wrap up and just say our next session will be July 6th. And we are having the Utah Parent Center come and talk to us as well. If you have a case that you want help or support for, hopefully you saw the powerful tool that a case presentation can do. So just reach out to us and we'll get you on the schedule. Thank you, and all have a great day.